as you can see, all we've done there is just changed the L to a small letter, and naturally we've got that functioning. So just always be careful in terms of working with capital or lowercase when it comes to your configuration. Sometimes the actual error itself does not specify the reason behind. So anytime that you look at aligning your specific functions, for instance, remember you always start with lowercase, and then the next letter, or the next word rather, needs to start with an uppercase in that regard. So always make sure of that naming convention when you deal with your Kotlin setup. So here we started with a capital, and then our next word started with a capital as well, and chose to run that. It gave us a whole list of errors in that regard. But just by looking at changing your naming convention by starting with a lowercase, and then obviously every other next word needs to be capital, we can then run that, and then naturally we get our result in that regard, right? So this is a typical example of the code. What this print line does is display this part, and then obviously your average here is displayed there as far as your particular setup would go. So that's how you'd run your average. So like I was saying earlier on, if you want to test this line of code, so I've just said that these 4 lines of code here, I'm just going to quickly delete, or let me just comment them out so that at least we can use them again. So I'm going to comment these 4 lines of code out. Yeah. And then remove that line there. So these 4 lines of code, like I said before, can just be replaced by that 1 line of code. If I run this again, we get exactly the same result. So just take cognizance of that particular fact. So what I was saying a couple of seconds back is that if you look at your PoE document, I think they didn't mention, they didn't specify how you do the average. They just said they need an average. So whichever way you do it, it will still give you one and the same in that regard. So whether you use this line of code or whether you use these 4 lines of code, you'll get one and the same result. Okay, so any questions on this one? I think that's pretty straightforward stuff for the average. Again, like I said before, once we're done with this, we can then move into the IDE and then see exactly how we can work with that in our PoE. Does anyone have any questions on the average here? I think we're sorted with the average, right? So the only difference in your setup is that this particular list of, obviously we're going to specify the array first, so that it's not hard-coded. We need to look at input from the user. So this is only, I think only 1 line of code that you're changing here would be the way in which you initialize the array. Again, I'll show you how to do that in a couple of moments. Do we have any questions on this? Any questions on this? Okay, cool. Let me just check chat here if there's someone saying anything. Any questions on that? Okay, cool. I think no one's saying anything. There's some, I think we should be good. So the other thing that we can then do is the min-max. So let's just quickly do the min-max. So remember min, if we do min, we've already done max because it's just the opposite, right? So we'll just do it quickly now and then see exactly how we can set that up. So I'm going to quickly just delete all of this here because we still need that last curly bracket. So remember, you also take cognizance of the curly brackets as well, right? So that you don't have unnecessary errors. So here I'm going to now define an array, right? And this array is going to be an array of integers. So I'm going to call this int array of, right? So again, as you can see, small letter for the first word, capital for the second, capital for the third. So the only small letter that you find is the initialization or the start of your particular function in that regard. So here I'm going to quickly do, let's just do 1 to 100 here. So I mean, let's go to the tens, right? So I'm going to start with 10, then I'm going to go with 30, then I'm going to go with 50, then I'm going to come back to 20, then we can do 90, then 70, then 80, then which number I'm missing? So I'm going to put 100. And 40. Let's see if we've got all numbers there. So I've got 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. We're missing 60, right? That's the last one. All right, so we've got this is an array of 10 numbers, but this one again, hard-coded, different from yours, because yours you now need to obviously initialize it as empty spaces. But again, like I said before, we'll see what how that will function. So what we want to do here is we want to print line, and we're going to go with maximum there is equals to, obviously, from the array that we've got. So here we can then array, let's say array find max, right? As an inbuilt function in that regard. So I want to find the maximum from this list. So obviously by looking at it, because it's an easier list of numbers, it's obviously going to be 100. But note that I haven't put this in order. So just obviously goes through everything first, and then only after it traverses the entirety of the actual elements does it then display the right thing there. So now that we've got that as our main, we now need to look at a function that is going to be int array find max. So this one is going to be called find max, right? And obviously, in terms of finding our max, there it's going to be integers, right? So we open that up. Right, and then what we want to do now, we've got our var of our current maximum. So current max is equals to, here we can now say int dot, as you can see, we already have an inbuilt value of min and max. But remember, because we're finding the maximum value, you obviously have to compare with the minimum value. In that regard, it's always going to be opposite from a functionality point of view. So I'm going to go and say int min value. And then here, this is where I'm going to use my for loop. So I'm going to go and say for I in this. So remember, an index is literally an element or part and parcel of an actual array in that regard. So this is the reason why we've got this indices part incorporated there. So what we now need to do here, we're now going to have an if statement. We're now going to say if the current, which is this, in this, oopsie, if this, we now need our square brackets here, all right, is greater than current max. All right, something has to happen. So remember, every time you put an if statement, you now need to put a condition in that regard. We now need to then say the current max is equals to that particular number that has been identified initially, right? And then once we've done that, because remember we've put in our for statement and we've used our if statement, we now need to return an actual value in that regard. So here we now need to then say return current max. Right, so that's your code. So first of all, we've got initialization of the array here, and then we now need to specify comparison between obviously the current and current max and the minimum value within this particular list as far as your arrays they are concerned. We've got our for loop. I within the actual this indices is actually just specifying the elements within that particular list there. And then we're now saying if it's greater than the current max, then it means that the current max is then equals to this. And then we return the current max or display it as is in that regard. So if we've done this correctly, we should then get, it should then display 100 here, all right? If we've done it incorrectly, then we obviously would not get a result. But let's run it. Let's see if we've got anything that works there. So it tells you maximum is 100. So if we change this to maybe let's say 190 here for the fun of it, and we run the same code, it should then tell you that the maximum is now 190. And then what you want to do is you want to find the minimum. So this is max setup. If you want to find the minimum, all you're doing is everything opposite here. So that means that here we now need to say minimum value and then find the min here. We also need to say min there. We also need to say current min. We change this one now to obviously it's going to be saying max value. And then this greater than sign changes to less than, right? Because obviously it's the opposite in that regard. This would obviously change to min. That's min, right? So let's do that and see if that actually makes any sense. So our current minimum there is supposed to be 10, but let's maybe put 8 here for the fun of it, so that it traverses the entire thing. So we need to know that, like right now, our list has got 11 digits, but obviously the minimum is the last one. Or maybe let's put 5 here, so that you can see exactly what the whole traversing of the entire thing. So obviously our minimum becomes 5 in that regard, just for argument's sake. So here, if we change this to minimum, so minimum, obviously this one goes min as well. This one now goes min. This one goes max. This one goes min. This one changes to a less than sign, right? That obviously goes to min, and sorry, this is supposed to be min like that, and this one also goes back to min. So if we've done it correctly, we've got our minimums. We should then find the value of 8 there. If not, we can then fix it immediately. So where did we miss our? So we've got min, current min, max value. Oh, here, sorry. So here we are supposed to then say current min, so that it doesn't confuse the process. So let's just check that once more. Minimum, max. That has changed. That's min. We should find a proper value now. What have we moved in that regard? Which one have we missed out? Is anyone able to see something here? I'm guessing this. Anyone seeing anything else there?
One, so the min must be capital letter M, and then the I and N must be small letters.
So this should be current min like this, right? Is that what you're saying? There we go. Thank you, there, Katleko. So there we've got that set up. So this is how you'd find that. So anytime we then change, so maybe let's put this as 2 instead. Obviously, to then, if we run that, it'll then display the minimum value being 2. So that's how you do min max in that regard. Okay, so any questions? Yeah, I think it's pretty straightforward. Let's go to our IDE now. Let's see specifically how we can play around with, with this and see what's happening. But anyway, before we move from this Kotlin playground, do we have any questions? Anyone? Feel free to either type in chat or unmute your mic and say something. Anyone with questions on this? Okay, cool. So I think nothing coming in. So I think we can choose to do away with this. And then let's see if I can open up my IDE quickly here. And then we can now look at, so the first thing that we'll obviously want to then look at, once I've opened up my IDE, is to look at let me just bring this down. All right. Which is our IDE? It's that one. Okay, cool. So naturally, this is an example of what your basic calculator would obviously look like as it stands. So you should have obviously entering the first number, second number. Then, like I was just mentioning earlier on, that obviously the first thing here, this would obviously be an edit text, And then you've got a text view that has got a label of an answer. And then you've got that same blank text view incorporated there where your answer is supposed to be displayed. Then you've got your buttons of add, subtract, multiply, divide, square root, and power. I think we're all familiar with what's happening in that regard. So what I was mentioning at the beginning of the session is that your stats button here is supposed to, there's no function that is actually happening here in terms of calculations. It's supposed to then move you to a separate or different screen in that regard. And that particular screen is supposed to take us to is the stats Kotlin file. So first of all, if you're still not familiar in terms of how to incorporate or add in more activities there, right? Let me just take you through that again. But again, this is something that you should be familiar with. So if you want to add more screens, right, more than one screen incorporated there on your folder or your specific URL there in terms of where your application is residing, right? So that should have the com.example.something something associated with your particular naming convention there. If you right click on that specific folder there, you'll find a context menu that appears. You've got new, right? So from new, you've got another sub context menu that appears. You're going to then select activity there, right? So from activity, we're going to then specify empty activity, right? So if you've just upgraded and you're using possibly Flamingo, or you're using Giraffe as an IDE, you might not find empty activity on its own. What you're now looking for is what they say is labeled as empty views activity. So just if you're not using, so for instance, Chipmunk, Arctic Fox, Electric Eel, if you're not using any one of those as a typical IDE, and you're using the slightly newer versions, like I was saying, Flamingo and Giraffe, for argument's sake, you'll have empty views here. That's the one that you'll select. But everyone else would naturally just use empty activity. The moment you select empty activity there, then you can obviously specify what that activity would be. So ultimately, in your example, could be you could call it stats, you could call it stats function, you could call it basic calculator stats, whatever name that you think is relevant there. Once you've named it accordingly, all you have to do is just then literally specify the finish, or click on the finish button there, and automatically that particular activity is created inclusive of the XML file. So all activities that you find within your IDEs there automatically will have an XML file, which is the one that deals with your interface in that regard. So once you've done that, just finish it, and then you're good to go. And that should be activated. So in my example there, I've got my stats that automatically opens up your distinctive. If you look at your layout there, I also have an activity stats XML file that is there. So all of these would work hand in hand. So my main activity as its activity XML file there, the stats will also have the stats XML file in that regard. So what you want to do, like I was saying earlier on, once you've got this incorporated, you obviously have to have Kotlin code that works with the stats in your stats Kotlin file. And then you also have to have the relevant display within your stats XML interface in that regard. So this stats function here, right? If you look at my Kotlin code here, naturally I've got, so this should be different accordingly. I've got private variables for my first and second number, and obviously for my answer in that regard. And then once I've incorporated that, I've set them up as null first, right? Because this is input from the user, and this answer is obviously going to be displayed from the calculation after input from the user in that regard. That's the reason why they're null currently, because we're expecting that to be generated at a later stage. You can also even use private initialization for later, so private init for later setups in that regard, whichever way. And then I need to then ensure that these are found by their IDs. So remember, within the actual main XML file here, if you go to my code, I've got IDs for my edit text here. I've got an ID for the second number. I've got an ID for the answer. I don't necessarily need an ID for the label here because there's nothing that is actually happening from a calculation point of view. So that's the reason why you find the text view that has the answer here, which is this one here. There's no need for an actual ID in that regard. And then I've got an ID for obviously my buttons. I've got IDs for everything else. So that's just the buttons incorporated there. So if you go back to my specific main activity code here, so you need to then find these three by the IDs in order for me to then function them. Same difference would go with the buttons, same difference in that regard. So I've got my value for button add, a view by ID button. Remember, that's the reference of an ID of a button add. So what we are focusing on here is this button here. So the value of button stat that I've incorporated, I found by its ID, it's a button as a widget. The reference is an ID of BTN stat. So I've got so remember, if it's a button, you need to set an on-click listener, right? So I've set an on-click listener for that. Oopsie, let me just, what happened there? Okay, there we go. So I set an on-click listener for all my buttons. So that means that anytime that someone clicks on the actual add button, something's supposed to take place because it's a button, right? So your system is listening for that event, which is clicking on the button, which should then activate something in that regard. So what we are focusing on is this part here, right? So for the stats, my on-click listener is not just generic, but specifically I've got an intent. So remember, your intent is showing that you want to incorporate a specific function, or you want to literally activate something that is supposed to be undertaken when that particular button is clicked. So in our example here, our intent is to move to another window or to move to another distinctive screen. So your actual line of code there is going to be val intent. Again, please make note of the small letter for the actual variable there and the capital letter for the actual function, because normally you find that you tend to get errors if you misalign those accordingly. So my val intent, and then I'm going to specify this. I want to move to the stats window, right? Or I want to move to the stats screen. So I'm going to go stats. I've got my double colon class.java. And please don't forget to start the intent. So a lot of candidates forget that just by writing this one line of code is not enough, because you start clicking on the button, nothing happens because you haven't started the intent. So from line 63 to line 66 here, these 4 lines of code literally are the ones that enable us to move to another screen. So please make sure that you take distinct cognizance of that particular part. So this enables you to move to another screen and name this accordingly. So note mine is stats .kotlin file there. So that's the reason why I've got stats incorporated there. And don't forget the class.java set up for your particular movement. So once I've clicked on that button, I should then be able to go to this particular screen. Right. So in my example, I've got this as my particular layout. I've got my stats functions as a label. I've got that as a label. I've got this now as an edit text, which is obviously going to be incorporating numbers from the user. I've got my add button in this particular fashion that enables you now to add into that particular array. And then I've got another label here that then shows the numbers that have been added in memory. Then I've got my clear button that enables us to remove everything as far as that particular screen there is concerned. Find average, find min-max. We've already looked at the functions there. And then I've got my answer displayed there. So in my example, like I was saying earlier on, you're not going to get marked down if you don't have this, but this is proper design, because this button now enables me to go back to the basic calculator should I need to go back to it. Right, so I can move between screens. Not just a situation where I click on the stats function, I run my stats, but I end up discovering that I still need to run a basic calculation, and now I have to restart the app completely. So you just want to make sure they haven't incorporated that as part and parcel. But like I was saying, this is something that you might want to incorporate just for cleaner code. but you're not going to get marked down or lose marks if that is not there. So that's my particular setup in that regard. And if you look at my stats as function now, this is what I was talking about earlier on in terms of the Kotlin code from the Kotlin playground. So in our example, if you look at what we did in, so I'm just going to enter here. So if you look at what we did in the Kotlin playground, we had incorporated val array, and we said as far as that particular array is concerned, it's an int. So obviously here we need to look at the right capitalization. So in my particular example, I had this, right? So I had 10, 60, 70. 80 there, I've got 100, I've got 20, and so on and so on and so on, right? I think you all get the gist of what's happening there. So this is what we had in our Kotlin playground. So we had initially initialized an array, but we specified, so this is hard-coded. But in these 3 lines of code, what I've distinctively done is specified that I've got a value called max numbers, and that max numbers is 10, which is the spaces within my array. So remember, when you initialize your array, you need to specify how many positions or how many spaces are in your array. So in my example here, I've just gone with specifying that my max numbers is 10. This specifies the numbers of the positions in my array. And then here, I've now specified the actual array. So if you look at this line of code, it's literally the same as this. The only difference now is that with this particular setup, what I've done is I've initialized an array that has 10 spaces. So instead of saying 10 here, I've gone max numbers. So you can literally do one and the same and specify something like this private file number array. And we can then specify that it's int array. And then here, you can just say 10. This is one and the same. So these 2 lines of code are literally one and the same thing. The only difference is that my particular 10 has been assigned an actual number in that regard, but it's one and the same. So we also now need to make sure that each position of our particular array is set to 0 by default, right? In that particular setup. But remember, this number count, we're going to use it at a later stage in terms of looking at how many positions have already been filled in our particular array. Remember, we said that the maximum is 10. So this enables us to now check, are we at 5? Are we at 6? Are we at 7? Are we now at 10 in that particular instance? So now if you look at, so this is the on-click listener for my basic calculator button. It's the same thing as the stats one. The only difference is that, and now I'm moving back to the basic calculator here. So again, like I said before, this is not necessary for you, but it's much cleaner or much smarter design, but you don't get marked down for that. So the thing that I wanted you to look at from a stats configuration here is, so this is the average setup I was talking about. So you've got your clear button. So these 3 things. So remember, this code I'm showing you is an example, right? When you're actually submitting your particular setup, it must be a lot different than what is here. Otherwise, it's just you copying code exactly as it is, and you'll get penalized for that. So this clear button, which is this one here, right? It's supposed to clear this number. It clears that particular position. It's also supposed to clear this part. So it clears the number that has been entered or the edit text that is allowing you to enter numbers. It also clears the particular numbers that are in the array. So it also sets the array back to 0 or back to nothing, if you want to look at it from that perspective. And it also clears the answer section. So if you look at this particular stats, this particular clear button, the array is set back to 0, right? And then the answer text, which is obviously supposed to be showing that the result of calculation, I've set this again to nothing because I've got nothing in my quotation or my quotation marks in that regard. And then here I've also got my stat number, which is the one that we are incorporating from a statistic point of view, set to clear. So all those three things have been set to 0 in that regard. So that's what this button does for us in that regard. So I've cleared the array, I've cleared the answer text, I've also cleared this particular section, which enables you to enter your particular number in that regard. So this is my edit text. That's the stat number, as you can see here. And this is obviously my memory numbers or numbers in memory that is also cleared. This is now the answer that is also cleared. So this is what this line 58 to 64 would do for you, right? Clears the array, clears the answer, and then obviously clears whatever number is incorporated there. So this is something you can play around with in terms of reconfiguration. And then, like I was saying earlier on, in our example, remember what we did in the Kotlin playground with that one line of code I was talking about earlier on. We had just done val average, right, is equals to numbers, which is the array dot average, right? In this particular instance, this is what I had initially done. So this is what we did in our Kotlin playground. It's exactly the same thing here. Just by writing this average here, we're good to go. So this is already an inbuilt function. That's why I was saying that for your average becomes a lot simpler because they haven't specified that you should distinctively code it in a specific fashion. You can just use the inbuilt Kotlin average function, and then you're good to go for your average in that regard. All right, so I think that should set you up proper for your particular configuration. So I think here, what I can quickly do here, let me see if I can run this so that we don't have any, so that we can see exactly how this functions. Let me open up my devices. Let's see what's happening there. Let me open this one up quickly, and then we can test it, and then we can see exactly what's happening from a running point of view. It might be slightly slower because of us running this online session plus running the emulator at the same time. But let's see if it can have a proper display in that regard. All right, so we've got this on. Let's see if we can actually run the app here. All right, so while that is running, do you have any questions thus far? Any questions for the min-max, the average, and the clear, and the add button? Also just show the example of the add there as well. I think that's the only other setup that I initially hadn't shown you. Right, any questions while this Gradle is still running? Let's check if we've got questions coming in here. So Herschelin, min-max code. Okay, so I'll go to your Kotlin playground quickly for that. So let me stop sharing this while this is running. You want the min-max code. Okay, cool. Just give me 2 seconds there, Shilin. Let me quickly come back to my app here since it's now running. I'll show you the code just now. Give me 2 seconds so that we can see. So what we were mentioning earlier on. So remember, your everything else should still function, right? So if you click on your stats button there, like I was talking about a couple of moments back, it should then open up your stats function, and we should be able to add, maybe let's go 23 there. And then we add that, right? So it shows you that it's been added there. And then if we go maybe 6 there as a typical example, so go maybe 6, we add that number that is added, we go 71, we add that, maybe let's go with just 5 numbers for the time being, and then maybe 86, and then we add that number. So we've got these numbers incorporated in memory. So if you find the average, we should find the average there. Find min-max, it should tell you the minimum value is 6, maximum value is 86. And then if we want to clear this, remember, it should then clear that and clear that. So there's nothing there currently. So if I click on clear, it clears all of that. But let's see if we had actually had something incorporated here so that we can see if it actually clears everything. So I'm going to add that, add an 8 again, add that, maybe a 6, add that, maybe put a 3 there. And then let me find the average, find the min-max. And then if I say clear, then 1, 2, 3 should be cleared completely. So all of those are cleared. What I was talking about in terms of now, let's say you're done with your stats function, you want to go back to your basic calculator, you should then also be able to click on basic calculator and then go back to your basic calculator and still run your functions in that regard. So still be able to run your add. But obviously this you're now familiar with that. We're not spending too much time on that. So you got that. You want to add that, you want to subtract, you want to multiply, divide, your square roots, because you got your 2 numbers. They didn't specify this for your PoE. They just said 1. But remember, just because we got the 2 numbers incorporated there, we still need to set that up. But you won't lose marks if the second number doesn't have a square root there. Then we've got our power. And then again, like I said, it was the stats function. And then we can always move around. So this the reason why I've got that is just to move around between the actual windows from that perspective. But I think that is pretty straightforward stuff. So we're good to go there. So Shilin, you were talking about, I think, okay, before I show you that, I think what was the add? It was the add button. Yeah, so here. So this now adds, so remember, we've got our array here, right? That we've specified int array, max numbers and whatnot. This add button, most candidates were discussed. So this add button is the one. So with this add button, we are now adding into your particular array, right? And this is what the number count was responsible for. Like I was saying earlier on, your number count is initially 0. it's supposed to then compare that to 10, or supposed to be the one that is in comparison. So as long as your number count, so if we add one number, that means our number count is no longer 0, it's now 1, as long as it's less than max numbers. And what is our max numbers? Our max numbers is 10, right? So as long as it's as long as it's less than, this is actually supposed to say less than or equal to, right? If you want to look at proper programming here, because if you say less than 10, that means that you're adding only 9 numbers. But if we go less than or equal to, then it means that you're including the 10th number in that regard. So here, might as well go less than or equal to, because remember, we're now literally saying we want to include the 10. We're looking at 10 digits in that regard. So less than or equal to max numbers, which is your 10. Then you've got that entered. As long as your number is not empty, we're actually supposed to enter something in there, and then your number count is supposed. This is incremental. So your number count adds until it gets to 10. And then you're done and dusted in that regard. That means that this particular part here is clearing so that we enter the next number. So if you look at what I was doing on my calculator, the moment I clicked on add, the edit text became blank so that I can enter the next number. And then once I clicked on add, edit text became blank so that I can enter the next number. This is what this line of code does. This just makes it, once you click on add, whatever number was there is now cleared so that you can make way for the next number to be incorporated. So that's your add button. Like I was saying earlier on, that we literally had not looked at in that regard. So you add, you clear, your average and your min max. You should be good to go in that regard. So Shalin, you wanted to look at your let me see if I can share this quickly. We are doing it in the Kotlin playground. So where was it here? So this was our min. So here is an example of the min max. I mean, sorry, the min max, but the minimum value. So remember, if you're looking at the maximum value, you just convert everything from minimum to max, and don't forget to also convert this less than or equal to sign, because I'll show you what happens if you don't do that correctly. So here, let's assume that initially we had set this at, we didn't change this, right? And we set it at greater than in our previous setup. So remember, the minimum value is 2, but the moment I click on run there, I get an error because it shows me that a whole different number in that regard. So that's the reason why I was saying, don't make the mistake of not changing your less than or equal to signs in that regard. So if I go less than here and I go run, then naturally it should now give me the right value in that regard. All right. So just take cognizance of that particular fact to avoid any errors that then might occur if you don't run it accordingly. So like I was saying a couple of seconds back, if you want to run for the maximum value, that means this obviously changes to max, but this is just wording, to be honest. So that shouldn't be a problem there. But this changes to max. That changes to min. I mean, sorry, to max as well. That changes to max. This changes to min. That changes to max. That changes to max. That changes to max. And then you've got your maximum value in that regard. As far as your particular setup is concerned. All right, so I think that should sort us out. Do you have any other questions? So let me just see here. So, so I've shown you how to initialize the array, so that is fine. Let's see here. Let me see if I can. Where were we? I think I need to stop sharing this so that it can go back to the PoE. Let me see if I can share. Where's the PoE? Yeah, there. All right. So I think so this part done. If you hadn't done that, just for revisiting, display numbers done, clear button done, average done. Have a button that finds min-max done, build and run the app done. Okay, cool. So I think that should be fine. So remember, when in your like I was saying earlier on, like I've said throughout the course of the semester, no one mocks code, right? So please make sure that what I mean by that is, if you're looking at it from an industry point of view, when you're asked to develop an app, right? No one cares about the code. They want to see a running and functional app. So yes, while you still need to discuss your XML and your Kotlin code, the main thing is that your app is supposed to run. So remember, in the first part, you were given part marks. Should your app not run or your emulator not run, but your code was there, you were given part marks for that. But in part number 3, the main thing is that the entirety of the app is supposed to run. So yes, you'll still explain that, okay, this is what how I coded my min-max, this is how I coded my average, and this is what my particular XML looks like. But most of your marks, if not the entirety of them, are going to come from a running application. So make sure that your emulator, your app runs on an emulator. Make sure that the functions that you've been asked of actually run. So like I was showing you in my example, I showed you the adding of the my numbers. I showed you that the numbers were displayed. I showed you how the clear button worked. I showed you how the min-max button works. I showed you how the average button works. I also even showed you how the stats button works, so that you can actually move from the stats, from the basic calculator to the stats window. So please make sure that in your video, all that is shown, right? So that you don't unnecessarily lose marks in that regard. It's not going to help you for you to have this code in, but your app doesn't run, or your emulator doesn't run, or you've got errors incorporated on your platform. This is the reason why I've been also telling candidates that whatever part you do, run, test, record. It doesn't even matter if you've got a video that is made up of 5 parts, as long as it's one main video that you've combined that is showing you the entirety of the app, that's fine. That should be fine without issues, so that you avoid a scenario where the last day you want to now submit, you're running your app is no longer running, but it was running yesterday, or it was running the day before because of possibly an update or a certain module within the actual IDE that was changed. So you want to avoid that as well. So make sure that in your recording, you showcase the entirety of what your app was supposed to do in that regard. So here, the general consensus is that you've already taken into consideration feedback from part number 1. You've already taken consideration of feedback that is given for part number 2 as well. The main focus is part 3's content and also the feedback. So if you didn't get 100% for part 1, I'm assuming that you fixed that for part number 2. If you didn't get 100% for part number 2, you start with stating that, okay, listen, for part number 2, I was advised to do ABC. This is what I did for my part number 2. Now my power button is functioning, or now my my square root button is now functioning. And then once you're done doing that, then start discussing what part number 3 is all about in terms of functionality in that regard there. So I think that should cover us in that perspective. So we're trying to see if there's anything else here from so I think maybe the other thing that you also might want to incorporate is that if no one enters anything, we should then tell you that, okay, no numbers have been entered. So let's see if we can quickly test that part. Let me rerun this. Hopefully this doesn't take as much time as it did before. So if no one enters any numbers, it should then say no numbers entered to find the minimum or maximum. Remember, you also want to incorporate a scenario or accommodate for a situation where no numbers have been entered in that regard as well. So let's see if we can quickly showcase that. Hopefully this doesn't take as much time as it did prior in terms of running. And then we'll entertain any questions from the floor regarding part number 3 in that regard. So just give me 2 seconds here while I'm running my Gradle again. While that is running there, is there anything else? So the looping thing, I think that's already been done from the 4-part solving. So yeah, I think we did discuss everything here. button that opens in a new screen. Okay, so that is fine. So let's see if, okay, so I think my app is running here. Let's see if we can quickly showcase the stats part. So let me stop sharing this. So I'm going to stop sharing that and then see if I can share my, let's say the IDE again. So we're on the, excuse me. So one of the stats function, let's see what actually happens if someone tries to find the min max with nothing entered here. So there we go. So it shows you no numbers to find min max. So this is something that you can incorporate as well to showcase that nothing has been entered in that. So it's the same thing that you can also do for the average. Again, I think if I say find average, it says no numbers entered in that particular setup. So I think, yeah, you can try and set that up. So what you can then do, like I was saying, so first of all, what I was talking about, just make sure that you showcase that you can enter numbers here. So your video should show, like I was saying, that you adding your numbers there. It should show, so you don't have to go whichever way. You should just show that you're able to display something in memory, and then you should be able to clear, find average, find min max, like I was saying a couple of seconds ago. So what I was just mentioning is that if there's nothing incorporated, if I try and find an average, says no numbers entered. If I try and find min-max, it will tell you no numbers to find min-max in that particular setup. So what you can, I might as well stop this. There's no need for me to showcase anything else. So what you can then do instead is, remember, we've got the if statement that we incorporated earlier. So here, if this happens, else if nothing is incorporated there, what you can then specify is to say, okay, listen, the text should then say no numbers entered there. That's for your average. And then for your min-max, same difference applies. So it'll then say min is min, max is max if something is found there. But if nothing is found, then you can should literally then say mem numbers.text, no numbers to find min max, min or maximum. So remember, whatever you put in quotation marks would be displayed as is. So here you can then say numbers, no numbers to find minimum or maximum value or whatever it is that you want to say, as long as it's not exactly like mine there. And then, or the other thing as well is this line of code now enables you to show the numbers display. So what this does is that, let me just put a comment here. What this line of code would then do, this last line of code here, the line 97 to 100, what that does is that all it's doing is that whatever numbers have been entered, so 45, if I entered the number, maybe 67, there's supposed to be a separator, which is a comma, and then I've got the number 67 there, another comma, separator, and then possibly 78. So this is what this line of code is doing, that the numbers in the array are now going to be joined in a string fashion, but obviously the separator is going to be a comma, which is that one there, in terms of separating the numbers that have been entered. But otherwise, it's also necessary as well, right, to ensure that whatever numbers that you're entering are displayed appropriately. You can also even choose to maybe have a blank instead, but possibly just having a comma or something incorporated there makes it a lot easier for anyone to visualize, or whatever the user is going to be using the calculator to see that, okay, listen, this is now number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3, this is number 4, and so on and so on and so on. You've got an appropriate separator in that regard. So this is something that you can also incorporate, but again, reconfigure accordingly in that regard, to ensure that in that display part, which is this one here. So we're now saying that in this part, we're now saying the number 45, then comma, 50, comma, 60, comma, whatnot and whatnot. is displayed in that particular fashion here. That's what these 3 lines of code would do for you. So just make sure you also incorporate that to avoid discrepancies there. But I think that that should set us up appropriately there. So let me see if I've got any questions here. So for the video, so I've got one more button that goes back to the basic calculator, do the same as the stats. Yes. So what I've done is, Leshlin, to answer your question there, it's not compulsory, like I said before, but it's just smart code. So the same code, so all you're doing, the same intent that we've got here, right? So remember, it's the same intent here, same lines of code. The only difference is that if I'm on my basic calculator, that stats button should take me to the stats window or the stats screen. If I'm on my stats calculator, stats window rather, that basic calculator button, which is this one here, right? This basic calculator button, which is this last one that you find on this screen, the basic calculator button, what it's supposed to do is just take me back to the basic calculator. So instead of having this as stats, it's supposed to take me back to my main activity. So it's the same, it does one and the same thing. The only difference is what the name of the button as well as the screen that the button takes you to. So it's one and the same. But like I said before, for the basic one, it's not compulsory, but it's just smarter code. So like I said before, if you incorporate it, so here's the thing, if you incorporate it, please make sure it functions. Because obviously you then end up getting penalized for something that's there that doesn't function, right? So if you incorporate it like I've done here, make sure that your basic calculator button functions. It takes me back to the basic calculator if need be. If you don't incorporate it, again, like I said before, you're still all right because you don't. It wasn't asked of you in the PoE, so you don't lose marks every which way. But avoid just putting in those extra things that don't then function, right? So you want to avoid that scenario. But if you put it in, that's the code, and then test it out as well. This is very basic, guys, because all you're doing is just moving from one screen to the other. There's no functionality that is there in that regard. All right. So I hope that answers your question there, Shlin. And then the other question, video, we should show all buttons are working. So the so here's the catch there, Lemmy. If you were given feedback for part number, so this is what I was saying at the beginning. If you're given feedback for part number 1, when you submitted part number 2, the assumption is you took into consideration that feedback, right? If you're if you then submitted part number 2, if you're sitting anywhere below 100%, you are given feedback for that part number 2. You then you should incorporate that for part number 3. So the assumption is that your basic calculator is now functioning accordingly. So obviously the few things that might be problematic for your basic calculator is this, the power button and the square root button, right? Because that's for part number 2. So to answer that question, Lemmy, you are supposed to showcase that as part and parcel of your feedback for part number 2 to say, okay, listen, that feedback you gave me for my square root not showing A, B, C is now working. That feedback that you gave me for the power button is now working. Once you're done with that, then you showcase part number 3. Does that make sense? So the main buttons that's supposed to show functionality for part number 3 is obviously the square root, the power button, and then you now move on to, because the assumption is divide and whatnot, that was already covered. And if you hadn't done the divide by 0 part, that also supposed to be showcased. But the assumption is that the main thing that you're focusing on is the square root and the power button before you start showcasing the stats. If you didn't do the divide by 0 properly, that is also supposed to be incorporated. So another thing, just a heads up there for everyone, when they say your square root for negative numbers is supposed to show an imaginary number, right? So if you go square root of -4, basic mathematics impossible, but advanced maths doable with an imaginary number. It's supposed to be then 2i, right? The I is short for imaginary number. Please do not state or say cannot find square root of a negative number. You will get a 0 for that part because that's not what you're asked to do. You're asked to still run the calculation, but then show that if it's a minus or if it's a negative number that was entered, then it's going to be the same result for a positive number, but with an I at the end, which is an imaginary number. So all you're doing is someone enters a negative number, you convert that negative into a positive, and then calculate, but put an I at the end. So a lot of candidates were saying, okay, in their configuration, they would say if it's a negative number, cannot divide by or cannot find a square root, negative square root, sorry, cannot find a square root of a negative number as a display on your calculator. That's incorrect. It's supposed to actually show minus, show a number, but then put I in the end there. So please make sure that you also fix that, because there were a few people that when I was marking for the groups that I was taking, I did give you part marks for that, but in essence, if it's done again for the final submission, you'll unfortunately lose the entirety of the marks because you didn't then address what it is that you were supposed to do. So make sure that your calculator can actually calculate square roots of negative numbers, but incorporating that's when the if statement comes in. So if input is negative, then it's supposed to do convert to positive and then calculate in that regard. So please fix that for those that hadn't. And then Karabo is saying video to an advice. Regarding the video, do you advise that we primarily just show the app working, or? So I think to Karabo, to answer your question there, it's advisable for you to at least speak to a bit of code. So speak to your XML. Obviously, the main focus would be on the Kotlin file, right? So just speak to, because your layouts are layouts, right? To be honest, there's not much that you can talk about there. But your Kotlin file should then just show your understanding of the code. Because remember, one of the things that you're also trying to do with the video is to show that you didn't copy someone's code, or you didn't just download off the net or use chat and then just plug it in, or use some kind of AI platform and then plug it in. You want to show that you understand the code that you've submitted, and you also want to show that the code is authentic, it's yours, and then showcase the app. So I suggest that main focus should be literally on the Kotlin file for your stats function. Speak to how you coded min-max, how you coded average, how you coded maybe the clear buttons and the add and whatnot, and then you can now showcase the app. So I strongly advise to say, don't just show the app running, but also, because remember, if it's just showing the app running, you might as well have one student complete the assignment and then just do a voiceover of his machine. I don't know if you get my logic. So you want to then make sure that you speak to the code to showcase that the code is yours, you understand what you were doing or what you submitted, and then showcase the app. I'm not so sure if that answers your question there, Karabo. Okay, cool. And then do we have any other questions that I didn't attend to here? All right, so Omar, you want to go over the layout. So which layout is this? So the layout for the stats, is it the stats layout that you're looking at? Let me see if this can display accordingly. So that's my stats layout. Remember, I think they've got it side by side in the PoE. I've just done it differently here with the linear layout, but it's one and the same. Does one and the same. So whichever way. So I'm not so sure what it is that you want. Is it the code you're looking for there, or just the layout in terms of the design here? So just please let me know there, Omar, in the chat there. So that's the layout for the stats there. Okay, cool. So remember, to answer that as well, or to extend on that, Omar, it doesn't matter really what layout you use, to be honest. As long as when you run the app, all content is displayed. So you might find that some candidates would have used maybe relative layout and then a linear layout within that relative layout, or started with a linear layout and then went with another linear layout within the same setup, or started with the linear layout and then went to the relative layout or constraint, whatever. As long as whichever one you're comfortable with, and as long as your content is displayed, it's fine. So you're not going to be marked down or marked up for using any particular type of layout. So as whatever layout that you want to go with, as long as you're comfortable with it, go ahead and do it. And also just make sure you test your app accordingly before you obviously then submit in that regard. So whichever layout, then that should be fine. Do we have any other questions here that I did not attend to? Okay, I don't see anything else in chat here. All right, so is there anyone else with questions? Yeah. Questions, contributions, or any concerns in terms of what you need to do for part 3? Any questions? Yeah. So please, once more, do not forget to do both platforms. So do your Git, do your I think there's a video that they were sent for Git layout. I mean for Git Git workshop, sorry. So go through that video and document again if you're still not clued in terms of what to do, but just make sure that you submit on both platforms the entire thing. So not just a link on VC Learn, but the entire, so a link plus the entire code or the entire program there, plus your video as well on both platforms to avoid discrepancies. And like I strongly suggest, like I said before, that if I'm not mistaken here, let me just quickly confirm while we are still on that topic there. Just give me 2 seconds here. So if nothing has changed, version 4 of your just expand this a bit. Once more, version 4 of your, let me see if I can share this now. Just give me 2 seconds. So version 4 of your PAS, I'm not so sure if there's another version that was published, but this is the current one I still have. You can always confirm. Your PoE is due on the 21st of November. Oh, I thought it was 28. So 28, I think it's PIXD, or is it must? What is it on the 28th that I was thinking? Oh, it's must. Okay, cool. So that was my mistake. So it's just a correction there. The PoE is due on the 21st. So that's just maybe 6 days from now, actually. So that's the 21st is Tuesday next week. So you might as well complete this this week, if not today, actually, possibly by Friday, Saturday latest, and then test everything out and submit. So that's on the 21st, which is a Tuesday next week. It's due by 9 o'clock. But like I said before, don't play for the Hero League and submit 5 minutes to 9. It never helps anyone. Submit way before time, so that you avoid any discrepancies that might arise in that regard. So IMAD there is the 21st. Okay, so yeah, so just take cognizance of that, just to avoid any discrepancies there. But I think we should be good. And then we've got. Please remind me to open new activity under main calculator. Okay, cool. So let's see if I can share the screen once more. So what I was saying is, so Omar there, if you look at, okay, so if you look at your IDE there, you'll naturally have the package name, right? So normally that's the one that will have com.example.calculator or .poe, whichever way that you've labeled it. So on this particular folder, you're going to right click on it, and then there's a context menu. You're going to go new, and then from new, you're going to go and select activity. And then from activity, you're going to go and select empty activity. So that empty activity that you create and you name it accordingly will also automatically create the XML file as well. I was just mentioning that if you're not using, because I'm currently using Electric Eel patch number 2 here, some of you might have gone the giraffe or flamingo route. You might not find empty activity, you'll find empty views activity. So that's the one that you go with. But for everyone else that's not using giraffe or flamingo, Arctic fox, a chipmunk, electric eel, like I was saying, these ones you'll just then use, or even bumblebee, although that one is slightly older. You can then just go in empty activity there. So if you click on empty activity, you'll then label your activity accordingly, and then just click finish. Automatically, it will, by default, Kotlin will always be the source language, but just check that again before you finalize. Once you click on finish, it will then automatically create. So here, let me just do it with you together so that you see exactly what I mean. So here, let me just start that process once more so that we're all on the same page. So right click, you go to new, you go to activity, and then you go to empty activity. So remember, you have right clicked initially on the package name. So empty, so here I'm gonna go and say, let's call this boost example. Right, and then once you've done that, automatically you find that the layout name is also incorporated there. As you can see, it now says activity boost example. It's in the package name, which is your calculator, and then the source is Kotlin in terms of the language. The moment I click on finish there, you'll find that now I've got my boost example, right? So I've got the Kotlin file there. And then automatically you'll find that the layout file is also created. So whichever activity you create by default, you also have so there's the XML, and then there's the Kotlin file. So that's how you do it. So you can do that for as many windows or screens as you'd want. But obviously in this particular example, we're supposed to then have just the 2, which is your main, and then your stats. So you can label the stats one anything that is relevant, literally. But as long as you've got that incorporated, then obviously that should sort you out there. Okay, so I think that hopefully that answers your question there, Omar. And then I've got another one here. Do you suggest a software screen recording that is allowed for the PO? To be honest, I think anything works here. As long as it's clear. So Mabel, to be honest, as long as it's clear, I think they've given you, there's one that they actually put in a PoE document. I can't remember what it was. Most of you are the ones, it's the one that you're using throughout the course of the semester. But if you go that route, please check that you're not muted. So a lot of candidates used that and possibly had, in all essence, a brilliant video, but that they had no sound, that unfortunately ended up losing marks because of. So please make sure that you, so Loom, right? So I think it's a Loom one that, so if you're going to use Loom, make sure that you're not muted. Always check that you're not muted so that you avoid losing marks. But in all honesty, anything that you choose to use there, Mabel, is doable as long as you're clear in terms of your voice, and then as long as the actual image itself or the picture that is being displayed there is clear as well, then you're good to go. So as long as we can see your code, we can actually see the app running, we can hear you clearly. I think we're not picky in terms of which particular recording software that you use there. So they've given you Loom in the PoE, but most have been forgetting to unmute themselves as they were recording. And in all honesty, guys, one other thing that I forgot to mention, a 45-second video does not assist you anyway, right? So again, try avoid playing for the Hero League, like I said, and submit proper videos that have an appropriate length that actually explain everything in detail. 45 seconds doesn't do anyone much good in that regard. So make sure you record accordingly. And I think for those that were having problems with the size of the actual clip, they've asked you to upload it on YouTube. So remember, you can unlist it. I know you lighties are all concerned about your images online, right? Or your rep online, so to speak. It's fine. Just have an unlisted. You can unlist it and submit. So just make sure that if your file becomes too large, upload it on YouTube and send the link. Make sure that the link works. You want to avoid a scenario where I try and open up your link there, and either the video is not there, or I don't have access to that particular clip. So please also check for those things. But you can unlist it, right? Or just make sure that whoever has the link is the only person that is able to view that video, if you don't want to have everything else in a public setup in that regard. But that is the route that they'll also want you to go, to make sure that if you go Loom, then you've got a Loom link. If you go YouTube, again, same difference applies in that regard. Make sure that the link functions. And if you don't want it public, you can always have it unlisted. We should be good to go in that regard, rather than private, but unlisted. I think that should work. Or you can then say anyone who has only the people that have the link are able to view the video. And I suggest that you keep it live only until you get your results, because you want to avoid a situation where if you then maybe qualify for a SAP, or if there's an issue with marking and so on, you've already taken down the video and there's no evidence of you having submitted anything in the first place. So just if you upload, you can always then take it down after results are out, right? In that regard, to avoid, again, discrepancies there. And then okay, so who else is okay? So Tulani, thanks for that. So that's the Loom one, exactly. And then is there any other question that I didn't answer here? So I've got okay. She said, so do we have to open a new page that takes to stats KT, or we can just work off? No, main activity. You don't have to actually open up. So the same. So if I understood your question correctly here, if you're going to open up a new activity, so remember here, the main package or the main file or setup or folder that you're working with is the one that I've highlighted there on screen currently, right? So all you have to do, if you want to add in, so remember, you can always then remove anything that you don't need. So for instance, here I can right-click, delete that, and then also go back here to your layout, right-click that, and then delete it if you need to in that regard. But you don't have to open up a new project or open up a new package in that regard. Within the same setup here, all you have to do is just right-click on that, go new, make sure that it's an activity, empty views or empty activity, and then you're good to go in that regard. So you don't have to, and as you can see, the moment you go activity there, empty activity, that already shows where it's going to be created, which is the package name here. So there's no need for you to create a new app or a new package name and so on. Within the same thing, all you're doing is creating a new activity that will have its own Kotlin file, or that will have another Kotlin file and its concurrent XML file in that regard. Right, so I hope that answers your questions there, or your question there, Tisetso. Let me know in chat there. Is there any other question there? Okay, so I think that's pretty much that. Is there anything else that I didn't answer here? No. All right, so Tisetso, I think you're the only last one that is still waiting for confirmation if that answer is what you were looking for, or if I understood your question correctly there. Let me know in chat there, yes or no. If no, then I can always expand on that. All right, Tisetso, are we good or not? Are you still with us? Okay, so nothing's coming through. No, that's fine. All right, so anyone else with questions there? if I'm asking if I could open a new project and work in the main activity. A new project and work in the main activity. Okay, I think I'm not getting your question there. Are you saying you want to start a new project completely? So like almost like redoing the entire thing? So if I've read that question again, it's new project and work in the main activity. So normally by default, whenever you start a new project, main activity will always be there by default. So are you saying you're starting a new project completely? Okay, that's doable, but remember, the thing is, you will still then need to showcase, unless you got 100% for part number 2, you'll still then need to showcase whatever feedback you were given for part number 2. Do you get the logic? So you'll still, in essence, part 1 or the basic calculator part will still need to be incorporated. So even if you do start a new project, you will still need to showcase part number 1. So, to answer your question, yes, that is doable. But the problem is, how do you then show us the stats button? So remember, if we say, okay, listen, we just want to, if I've understood your question correctly, we now just are working with, so I'm going to close boost example. Instead of just having main and stats, we're going to just have stats here that will have just for part number 3. So that's possible. But remember, you still need to show the stats button. You still need to show that if someone clicks on the stats button on your app, so if someone here on the main activity clicks on the stats button, you want to show that that stats button takes them to a separate window. So here, where it says stats functions, you still need to showcase this. So every which way, you still need to have 2 Kotlin files. So you still have to have a main activity and a stats file that is separate. So you'll still need to do it in that particular way. I don't know if I'm making sense. So you still need to make sure that this main activity one is there. You click on your stats function, it then takes you to this window here. So there's no way you can just do it on part number 3 on its own, because part 1 and 2 will still be incorporated every which way. Does that make sense? Okay, cool. All right, so then that's fine. All right, cool. So do you have any questions? I think we've got some have left already. So we've got Diego, Katlejo, Mabel, Azar, Tulani, Setso, and Karabo still left. Any other questions there before we conclude? Any other questions before we conclude, or we're good? Tulani, what's up? Your hand is up there. So we'll have Tulani and then, okay, cool. And then Karabo, your hand is up. What's up? So Karabo, you can go ahead with your question. I see your hand is up there. Yes. So you're just literally continuing from part 2, and then you're adding in part number 3's work, or the PoE's work, which is the stats part. So whatever feedback you got for part 2, fix that up, and then add in for part number 3. So so what I was saying literally is this: whatever feedback you got for this part, do that, fix it. So literally should be square root and power mainly, and possibly the divide by 0 part. And then once that is fixed, then obviously move on to the stats part, which is the second window or the second screen. And then you can start coding for that from that. So you're literally continuing from part number 2, yes. Okay, cool. So anyone else's questions there?
Sorry, sir. Can I please ask, with the target and compile SDK, is it still 33?
Yeah, 33 is still fine. So if you then get issues, or if it says you need to change that up, then you just change the 33s to 34s. So you go for the first 33, you change it to. So let me quickly show you here. What I mean by this is where's our Gradle scripts here? So just in case, let me just see if I can open that. No, we need this one. Yeah. So as you can see here, so currently 30 minimum SDK is 24 for mine, 33 for the target and compiler setups. Like I said before, I'm currently running Android Studio Electric Eel patch number 2. So this is still perfect for me in that regard. But should there be a need, or the IDE asks you to change that, and it's not currently 33, it's not currently or it's currently 33, then change it to 34. If it's currently 32, change it to 33. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. So I change both. If I have to change, I have to change both the compile and the target SDK.
Yes, always. So you need to always make sure that the compile SDK is changed and the target SDK is changed. Both of those need to have the same number. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right then. Okay, cool. We got about a couple of seconds left. Any other question before we conclude? All right, same to you. Thanks, Karabo. All the best for part 3 there. Anyone else with questions? Okay, cool. Not a problem. So that's fine. So anyway, let's get cracking, guys. All the best for part number 2 there. If you still have questions, maybe you can just send us questions on Teams there. But I think we should be good to go regardless. So let's get cracking. All the best. We'll see you in the next one.